This is a live React app that AI generated directly from my Figma file. I originally drew inspiration from print and poster design, so the layout isn't following what you would typically see on everyday websites. When I first fed this to AI, it broke, and with some follow-up prompts, it didn't do much better to fix it. And it turned out it wasn't my prompting, it was actually how I'd set up my file. So I'm gonna walk you through some of the adjustments I made to my Figma file to make it play nice with AI. So I created this design in my last video, and I had used Affinity to create some vector artwork that I imported into Figma and created some additional vector artwork in Figma. And I didn't really pay much attention to creating tokens or making components or using any of the auto layout features. I wanted to feed it like this to Figma Make to see how good of a job it would do in creating this prototype. And when I did, it didn't do a good job. It ended up creating some elements in the wrong places and didn't render the SVGs out properly. So I knew I had to change my approach. Okay, so this is what I initially fed to Figma Make. And you can see that the design isn't really well organized. There's no components. I don't even have groups in here. It's just messy. And this is what it generated. You can see that it got some things right, but other things like positioning was off. This design here doesn't match what was here initially, and that was one of the illustrations that was created in Affinity Designer. But you can see the other icons that were designed, or these other illustrations, they're not rendering correctly, and Figma Make was trying to recreate them instead of using them as SVGs. You could also see that this wasn't lining up the way it is in the design. So it's pushed a little bit further to the right. And then the cards underneath, it did something weird here with the layout. It was stacking them like diagonally and everything was off. It put them in color and just didn't get that section right. Capabilities was better. The only thing here was this wasn't lined up properly, and these icons here aren't matching what was in the design, so it should all be in one line, and those are all one piece of vector artwork, but it ended up splitting it up for some reason. And then it did this weird thing here with that kind of abstract design that's in the hero. It looks like it split up every line and started rotating it at different speeds, which looks kind of cool, but it wasn't what I was after. Just to show you kind of what that was supposed to look like. This is the original vector right there, but it is kind of neat. It's kind of like a happy accident. So the first result needed lots of work, and I didn't want to keep going back and forth with AI and burning up AI credits just to make small little tweaks for some of the SVG icons and some of the positioning. But since there were so many positioning issues, I thought it might be better to use the grid inside of Figma and see if Figma Make would be able to position things better if it had a grid to work from. And if anything, I think that made it worse. So the next step was moving into the Figma Grid. So right now this is just showing the rows and columns for that section. So this hero is just a 12 row, 12 column area, and you can see that I have a CSS grid enabled here, so you can see it's 12 by 12. I just have the rows and columns enabled so that you could see it better, but I have everything positioned into this grid, so you can see that anything that I have selected here has a column span and a row span. So in my mind, I was hoping that this was going to be better for Figma Make and it would do better with positioning, but what it ended up generating was even more off than the initial messy design. So it still was struggling with icons here. I don't even think it chose the right font, honestly. And then this is still having an issue with the layout here. It did get the cards right, well, kind of right. It ended up doing something weird with this button. It made it upside down, and it put an arrow there that wasn't even part of the design, and it made this overlay section to the card. So it kind of went and did its own thing there with the information in the card. And then this capability section, it kind of did its own thing there too. It didn't even use the icons and move this to the left instead of above, and didn't have that border that was on the left there either. And the footer, it ended up doing its own thing here too. It didn't use the design that I had. This actually should have been in the hero. And I tried recreating all of these vectors also with just plain markup, and it didn't use the logo. It just turned it into text. So this was using Figma Grid, and as you can see, it looks like it got worse. So I created another version of the layout, and this time I removed the grid and just stuck with the typical rows and columns. I ended up cleaning up the SVGs, and I ended up creating some components and really leaned into the auto layout features. And when I sent this to Figma Make, it got me about 90% of the way there. And this was a much stronger foundation that I could work with and build from. So once I moved into auto layout, that was when I started going in and cleaning up some of the SVGs. And I'll show you an example of what the SVGs look like before, so you can see why it was giving it a problem. So I have this group here, this barcode, and I don't know if this was because of the way it exported from Affinity or how Figma handles SVGs, but it created a group for every single vector item. So I had to go in there and ungroup all of those so that it's just one group. So that looks like this. So now you see all the vectors are within that one group. And once I did that, it ended up rendering these vectors a lot better. I used auto layout where I could to try and position things better and stack things. So once I fed it to Figma Make, this is what it ended up generating. Not exactly, I went in and made some tweaks, but it had gotten a lot closer, and I was able to use this and tweak it. So I went in there and made some adjustments in the markup to use the grid and tailwind, since auto layout wasn't keeping things lined up well either, but it was close enough to where I could make the adjustments, and it had all of the elements there. So it was a much better starting point. Since Figma Make generates Tailwind and React code, I was able to go in there and adjust some of the grid classes in Tailwind to make the layout fit my design better. A lot of it was nitpicky, but I just wanted to tighten it up a little bit. Once I had it there, I prompted it to add some motion, and that's when it generated some of the parallax effects that I have in the hero. And I also had it generate some hover states that I wanted to show. So to show you what I did to tweak the auto layout to line up with the design, the way I had it lining up with the grid and everything, using this intro section as an example, I'll show you what I did here in the components. So I stripped out all the flex box classes that were added in by Figma Make and replaced them with grid classes. So I ended up adding the 12 columns to the overall section. And then where I have the content, that spans 7 columns. So I added that class, but I told it to start at column 5 because that's what happens in the layout. So you can see this is a 7 column span, but it starts on the 5th. And once I added those classes in there, that's when my layout started getting closer to what I had in the design. But those were some of the things that I had to tweak in here in the code to get it to work the way I wanted it to. So why go through all this trouble of creating the same layout multiple times? I was genuinely interested to see how Figma Make works and to see how I could use it in the future in my UX workflow. I want to be able to bridge the gap between putting up designs quickly and getting them into a prototype so that I could communicate the vision for my concept clearer to a client instead of trying to talk through it and explain what motions would happen. So I think this will definitely fit in my workflow in the future in that use case. I think I'll keep experimenting with it to see if there's any other ways that I could use it in the future. But for now, that's how I see it working out. And maybe on some landing pages, I do need to see how it handles mobile. I didn't feed it my mobile screen yet. I'm sure that'll be for another video. But if you do want to see how I design this and the process of that design, I'll link the video here so you can go check that out. Thanks for watching.